The first message came in as a simple number on my screen, $240,000. That was the amount my uncle claimed I owed the family. Like love could be invoiced and grief could be financed. When I arrived at the house, nobody greeted me, nobody asked about my week, and nobody even pretended to be happy I showed up. They were already seated like a tribunal, plates untouched, eyes sharp, waiting for me to sit in the one empty chair they left at the end of the table, the chair that felt less like a seat and more like a witness stand. My Uncle Joram didn't waste time. He slammed a fat notebook down beside the bread basket, the cover stained from years of greasy fingers and old lies. He pointed at my chest as if he could jab the debt straight into my ribs. "You're paying starting today," he said. "It's what you owe for what happened to Thibault." Then he slid a typed plan toward me, neat columns and bold numbers, the kind of document people use to make theft look respectable. It said I would send $4,200 every month, indefinitely, straight into an account I didn't recognize. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. That surprised them, and I could tell because my aunt's lips parted the way they do when they expect to scream and get silence instead. I stared at the payment plan and felt something settle in my chest, not fear, not sadness, but that cold focus I get at work when I find a ledger that doesn't balance. Numbers are honest. People are creative. And my family, sitting across from me with their rehearsed faces, were being extremely creative. "Before you say anything," my Aunt Maylene added quickly, putting on the voice she used at church, "remember this is about sacrifice. He stepped in for you. He paid the price." She said it like a prayer, like repeating it enough times would make it true. Joram leaned closer and lowered his voice like he was offering kindness. "Sign tonight," he murmured, "or you walk out of this family forever." The threat wasn't shouted, but it was heavy, a quiet promise of exile. I nodded slowly and let my eyes drift to Thibault, my cousin, the so-called hero. He sat back like a king enjoying a feast, tapping his teeth with a toothpick, smiling at the power in the room like it belonged to him. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table, screen down, casual like it meant nothing. "You're right," I said. "Debt should be paid. But if I'm handing over a chunk of my life every month, I want to hear it again. I want the story from your mouth, Thibault. Tell me what you did for me." The shift was immediate. Thibault straightened as if someone pulled a string on his spine. This was his favorite performance, the one he'd been applauded for at every family gathering. His eyes flicked to my aunt and uncle to make sure they were watching. Then he began, slow and dramatic. He described an alley, shadows, strangers, danger. He said he told me to run. He said he stepped in front. He said he took the blow meant for me, like the universe had chosen him for bravery. My aunt made a soft sound like she was swallowing tears. Joram nodded along, proud, as if he'd raised a legend. But as Thibault spoke, I saw the truth the way you see lightning behind closed eyelids. That night wasn't a legend. It was a clear memory, sharp and humiliating. We weren't walking calmly like he claimed. We were arguing. He was angry because I wouldn't lend him money. When the men appeared, he didn't shield me. He grabbed my wrist and shoved me forward like an offering. I can still hear his voice from that night, not heroic, not protective, just panicked and cruel. "Take her," he yelled. "She's the one with cash." Then he ran fast, without looking back, leaving me there with my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. The men didn't hurt me. They laughed. One of them called him a snake. They chased him because watching him sprint made it entertaining. When they caught him, they broke his arm because he begged too loudly and cried too hard. Back at the table, Thibault finished his speech and rubbed his forearm for effect like he was polishing an award. "I'd do it again," he said, smiling, enjoying the respect. "That's what family does." I stared at him and watched the confidence on his face, the confidence of someone who has lied so often the lie has built a home in his head. Then I looked at my uncle and aunt, the architects of this story. The ones who needed a hero so badly they were willing to turn me into the villain if it kept their fantasy alive. I flipped my phone over and tapped once. The recording stopped. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. I just breathed in and let the quiet stretch. They thought I'd come defenseless, but I'd been expecting this for weeks. I work in forensic compliance, the kind of job where you spend your days pulling threads until the whole sweater comes apart. People think fraud is smart. Most of the time, it's just arrogant. The arrogant always leave footprints. 3 weeks earlier, at 1:48 a.m., my credit monitor sent an alert. New loan inquiry, high risk, 75,000 requested. Not my signature. Not my device. I didn't panic. I didn't call anyone while shaking. I opened my laptop, tracked the attempt, and watched the data point back to a familiar location like a finger pointing through the dark. It wasn't random. It wasn't a stranger. It was my own family house. The same Wi-Fi network, the same pattern of logins, the same sloppy timing. Once I started digging, the list grew ugly. 2 credit card applications, a personal loan, a request to reset my retirement account password. It wasn't desperation. It was a plan. They weren't asking me for help. They were trying to drain me quietly, then guilt me loudly when the quiet theft didn't work. That's when I understood why the debt suddenly mattered again. They needed a reason to take my money without calling it theft. So when Joram slid the envelope toward me at dinner, I already knew what was inside. It wasn't a simple payment schedule. It was a power authorization wrapped in polite wording, a legal trap meant to give them direct access to my accounts. "It's easier," Maylene said sweetly, pushing it past the soup bowl. "We'll manage the transfers so you don't stress." Joram leaned in with fake warmth. "Just sign. It's a formality." I let my fingers rest on the envelope like I was considering it seriously. Then I smiled, the calm smile I use when someone thinks they're manipulating me, but they've already walked into the room with their confession taped to their shoe. "I can't sign this," I said. Joram's face tightened instantly, anger rising like a lid being forced off a pot. "What do you mean you can't?" he snapped, no longer pretending to be reasonable. "I can't," I repeated, steady, "because the asset you're trying to use as leverage isn't mine anymore." Silence hit the room like a thrown blanket. Maylene's eyes widened. "We saw the valuation," she whispered. "We saw the equity." I nodded. "You did last week. But 2 days ago, I sold it." Joram shoved his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "You sold the family house," he barked, as if he owned the air in it. "It was never the family house," I said. "It was my house, my name, my mortgage, my risk." I pulled out a copy of the closing statement and laid it flat. "Cash sale, fast close, no delays." Joram's jaw worked like he was chewing rage. "Where's the money?" he demanded. "Gone," I shook my head. "Protected, locked in a trust you can't touch, no loans against it, no signatures to forge, no shortcuts." That's when Thibault stopped looking smug. He started looking scared. Fear changes people's faces in a way makeup never can. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered. I turned to him slowly. "I did," I said, "because you keep setting fires and calling them accidents. I saw your gambling charges, the betting apps, the cash advances, the late-night transfers." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked at my aunt like a child looking for permission to lie. Joram slammed his palm on the table, dishes jumping. "Enough, you still owe us," he shouted. "You promised after the incident." I let out a short laugh, dry and sharp. "A promise based on a story that isn't true," I said. Then I pulled out another document and slid it across the table, not dramatic, just precise. "Here, what's true? You already collected money for that night. A lot of it." Joram stared at the paper like it might bite him. The document showed a compensation payout from years ago, filed under their names, paid for medical costs and trauma support. The amount was huge, and it was real. Maylene went pale so fast her hands started shaking. "That was compensation," she tried, voice cracking. "For what he suffered." I nodded. "Exactly, which means the debt was paid. But you didn't stop there. You kept the paperwork, kept the narrative, and now you're trying to charge me for the same bill twice." Joram's breathing got heavy. "You can't prove what we did with it," he said, voice suddenly smaller. I leaned forward. "I don't have to guess," I replied. "I pulled the records. The payout didn't go to recovery. It went at clearing your private debts. It went to a vehicle you couldn't afford. It went at plugging holes you never admit exist." Thibault's face twisted like he might throw up. The hero costume was slipping, and underneath was just a man who'd been protected from consequences his whole life. Maylene started wailing about family, about betrayal, about how I was ruining everything. Joram stood so abruptly his chair tipped. "You're not leaving," he said, moving toward the door as if the room belonged to him and I was property. When I rose too, he slammed his body into the doorway and locked it, turning the bolt with a hard, final click. The sound was small but terrifying because it meant he'd chosen force over pretending. He leaned close enough that I could smell bitter coffee and panic on his breath. "Give me your phone," he hissed. "Give me the recording and the papers, and maybe you walk out." His eyes weren't fatherly, uncle-like, or anything familiar. They were wild, furious, the eyes of someone who just watched their control evaporate. Behind him, Maylene made a frightened noise. Thibault didn't move at all. He sat frozen, the coward in him finally visible. I didn't step back. I raised my phone and tilted the screen toward him. A call timer was running, counting quietly like a fuse. I called emergency services before I asked Thibault to tell his story, I said, calm as ice. The line has been open the entire time. Jorem's pupils snapped to the screen. His hands loosened on the door. They heard you admit the claim. They heard you threaten me. They heard the lock. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the outside world arrived. Sirens close, not distant. Flashing lights spilled through the front window, turning Jorem's face into alternating colors of fear. A hard fist pounded the door from the other side, and a voice shouted for it to be opened. Jorem stood there like a man whose body forgot how to obey him. He looked at me, and for the first time he looked unsure. I reached past him, unlocked the bolt myself, and pulled the door open. 2 officers stood on the porch, hands ready, eyes scanning. One asked if I was safe. I am now, I answered, stepping onto the porch like air was something you had to earn. I pointed back inside. He refused to let me leave. There's documentation in that room tied to a fraudulent claim and attempted identity misuse. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth carries. I walked down the steps without looking back. I heard the protests, the scrambling, the desperate bargaining. Then I heard the sound that mattered, metal clicking into place. Not a dramatic movie sound, just a simple mechanical click that meant consequences had finally arrived at the house they'd been hiding behind. My hands were steady. My stomach was. Relief doesn't always feel warm. Sometimes it feels like emptiness where fear used to live. Days later, an official notice came through. An investigation had been opened, assets flagged, repayment demanded. They didn't negotiate. They clawed back what was taken. The car went first, then the wage garnishment. The accounts frozen. The truth is, systems move slowly until they don't, and then everything happens at once. Thibault, the family's precious symbol, was required to repay a portion too, because his name was tied to more than one signature that wasn't mine. One morning, I sat alone with coffee that tasted normal, not like stress, and I opened a new notebook. Not a stained one full of invented debts, but a clean one with crisp pages. I wrote down what mattered. My assets, my income, my plans, and the one thing I'd finally stopped spending. My silence. The number at the bottom was positive, and it felt strange, like stepping onto solid ground after years on a swaying bridge. I didn't feel happy the way people expect in stories like this. I felt balanced, like a scale that had been jammed for years finally clicked back into place. I lost the illusion of having a family that would protect me, but I gained something real. Safety, autonomy, and a future that could not be signed away over dinner. And that's the twist nobody warns you about. Sometimes the victory is quiet. Sometimes the justice is not applause. Sometimes it is simply walking out of a door and knowing nobody can lock it behind you again.